Thank you. Welcome. I think if you want to change your life, you need to take perspective. And I'd like to begin with a very big perspective. This is our home. This is planet Earth. And it's been around for about 4.6 billion years. Now, imagine that as a 24-hour clock. Our species, Homo sapiens, arrived around about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. So on that clock, we appeared around about 5 seconds to midnight. So you realize that we actually haven't been around for a particularly long period of time. And if you consider our individual lives, 70 years if we're lucky, 80 years possibly, then you can immediately see that we are here for the briefest moment of time. The fact that we're even here is so unlikely if you consider all the countless sperm and the countless eggs that never met. And yet we were born into this part in human civilization, born into relative wealth, relative health. And what I'm here to talk about is that this is such a precious moment for all of us, and yet we squander it. Why do we squander it? Because we are in the relentless pursuit of material possessions and wealth. I think we risk our lives, as Ranjan was saying. We are stressed. We are pursuing things that ultimately are impacting on our health, physical health, and our mental well-being. Consider, for example, this is the household itinerary of a middle-class American family. Look at all the stuff they have. Now, a lot of this stuff is useful. It's conveniences, and I couldn't imagine life without cookers and fridges and transport. But actually, if you open up the garage, you'll find there's even more stuff. Very few garages contain cars anymore. We seem to be on this relentless pursuit of accumulating more and more things that we don't need. Why is this? Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not against wealth. I'm not against the pursuit of wealth. I think wealth is a very useful motivator to stimulate innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on. What I'm having a problem with is this overconsumption, the pursuit of things that we really don't need. And I think, as I've said, this is bad for us as individuals in terms of our mental health and physical well-being, but it's also bad for us as a species. Consider, for example, the folly of this situation. In 1859, the Royal Charter was returning from the Australian goldfields when it was shipwrecked off the north coast of Wales on returning to Liverpool. Now, it was bad that there was a loss of over 450 lives, but what makes this more tragic is that most of those people drowned because they wouldn't give up the gold belts they were carrying. They were literally weighed down by their gold. Now, that is a tragedy, and I think most of you would agree, well, that's just a one-off. But every year, we see other examples of people behaving irrationally when it comes to their possessions and their wealth. I got this one from a news report only a couple of months ago.
Jessica, we're here on High Street, and this is the driveway where police say the SUV was stolen. The owner wasn't going to let them get away so easily, and like you said, jumped on top of the hood. And we have video of the wild ride. This is surveillance video from a neighbor's doorbell camera. First, you can hear yelling. Then an SUV speeds by with a man on top, flailing his legs and screaming. Police say he held on for more than a mile as the suspects drove towards Bridge Street. That's where he was flung off of his vehicle. A friend of the man says he's a construction worker in his 50s and lives here with his wife and daughter.
He's a tough guy.
Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think many of us in the cold light of day would risk our lives for the value of a car, possibly a car that's not even owned outright if it's leased. So you can see that we have a really unhealthy relationship with our property. There's something about theft, and when people try to threaten take our stuff away, we take it very personally, and we react with that flight-fight response we were hearing about in the previous talk. That's not healthy. There's something very wrong with that. And it's not just the problem of what we do as individuals. I think as a society, our obsession with the disposable economy is having impact on the environment. I don't think anyone could not have been moved by watching the Blue Planet 2 documentary last year, where we saw the consequences of unrelenting, conspicuous consumption. I think the disposable economy is typified by the overuse of plastics. But this is also a good news message, because I think after we witnessed that, people were motivated to change their attitudes towards plastics. And indeed, we're now starting to see the consequences of that. The banning of single-use plastics, for example, many manufacturers are now shifting their perspective. So I think we can change when you draw attention to the problem, which is why I wrote a book called Possessed. Because I think if you want to change behavior, you have to explain why we are so irrational in the first place. And in the book, I address a number of issues, but I take the perspective of evolutionary psychology. You see, we're not the only species on the planet which has things. This is the capuchin monkeys in South America demonstrating how they can use tools. But unlike animals, we're also animals, by the way, but we are different because we have technologies. We don't just have one tool, we have a multitude of tools. And unlike animals, we don't abandon them when we've used it. We keep them and hold them and we collect them and we covet them. We start to accumulate vast numbers of things. Now, we've been making things and accumulating things for millennia. We've had tools for at least 200,000 to 300,000 years. But we also have other things. We have objects of sentimental value. We have objects of aesthetic value. We make jewelry, for example. But even these very early period of human pre-civilizations, we still didn't have a lot of stuff, necessarily, because we were living as hunter-gatherers. We didn't have the technologies, but we couldn't carry lots of things. All that would change at the end of the last ice age, when we invented agriculture. So we learned how to cultivate crops, domesticate animals. And now, of course, we became settled or established. And this is the beginning of establishment. Because now property and ownership becomes a really important mechanism which protects your property. It's a means of passing on your resources to your offspring. It's a means of establishing hierarchies and cultures. And all this is underpinned by property. It's all underpinned by our laws, our conventions, and the notion of ownership. Something that doesn't really exist in the animal kingdom. But in terms of things, unless you were very, very rich, individually as groups, we didn't have, or as families, we didn't necessarily have a lot of things. Take, for example, this is the itinerary of a medieval family from Poland. Now, remember back to that slide I showed you with the Americans. This is the sort of typical things they would have. There's missing maybe some tools and furniture, but in general, people led fairly simple lives. They might have a small holding, maybe a cow or a pig or something, but they didn't have a lot of things. But within about 400 years, that picture would change of the household. This is a Victorian household. As you can see, there's a profusion of different things, all sorts of stuff made by the new Industrial Revolution and the increase of trade and things being brought in. People started to accumulate more and more things. You see, when the Industrial Revolution took off, we migrated out of the countrysides to fill the cities and the factories. We didn't have our small holdings anymore. We were paid wages. And once we had paid for the accommodation, we had disposable incomes. And what did we do with that? We bought more stuff. You might say, well, that's not surprising. But I think there's a very interesting perspective about what motivates us to buy things. Something that the father of economics, Adam Smith, pointed out. When he said, a rich man glories in his riches because he feels that naturally draw upon him the attention of the world. The poor man, on the contrary, is ashamed of his poverty. He feels that places him out of sight of mankind. You see, now our possessions are signaling our status. They're signaling our importance. And because we're now living in these highly dense populated cities, we're trying to establish who we are by what we can show off, what we can display. Now, this has a basis in evolutionary biology. Poster child for displaying and showing off, of course, is the male peacock. Now, when Darwin wrote about the male peacock, he says, every time I see a feather from the male peacock's tail, I feel sick. And the reason he felt sick was because the tail is such a ludicrous evolutionary adaptation. It's metabolically expensive, it's cumbersome, it places the animal at risk, and it seems to run counter to natural selection. If you remember, he argued these adaptations were best or evolved because animals were suited to their environments. So he couldn't understand initially why this tail would evolve. But then, of course, he developed another feature of natural selection, namely sexual selection. And he realized that animals are not just competing against the environment, they're competing with each other in order to mate. And typically, given the imbalance between the number of sperm and the number of eggs that could be produced and the cost of the investment of raising that, there are many males tend to compete with each other, and females select the mates based on their competition. Now, in the animal kingdom, that can be a fight, but fighting is very risky. And so another strategy is to adapt displays, to signal how your prowess, your genetic prowess. And this is why the males are the most colorful in the animal kingdom, why they have the more ostentatious behaviors, because they're signaling their genetic prowess to the female. Indeed, the peacock tail, the more elaborate it is, is a good proxy of its genetic integrity. So the genes that build the good tails are also the genes which build the immune systems. So this is a way of showing off just how good you are to the potential mate. Now, we, of course, also evolve physical features. Humans also evolve physical adaptations, which are attractive to our mates. But, of course, we also had technology. We could signal our genetic prowess by our resources and our wealth. And that's why we have the Ferraris, and that's why we have the Rolex watches. And this is why we are showing off what we have as a way of telling others that this is, we're a good bet for genetic reproduction. And this need to show off got the term conspicuous consumption, coined by Thorsten Veblen, the sociologist. Because he pointed out people would rather buy a silver spoon over a pewter spoon, even though they do the same job, because the silver spoon signals just how successful you are. But this wasn't enough. You see, with the introduction of the Industrial Revolution, we had this overproduction of stuff. And to keep the economic growth moving forward, people had to be persuaded to buy more and more things they didn't really need. And this was achieved through the efforts of the marketing gurus such as Eddie Bernays or the psychologist John Watson. Because this is the beginnings of advertising and marketing, persuading you that you are inadequate unless you have the latest stuff. In fact, Watson is the father of the celebrity endorsement. He realized that if you pair people that you admire with products, people they'll buy the product to emulate their heroes. So we are encouraged to own more and more things. And why? Well, because our sense of who we are is partly by what we own, a point made by William James, the father of psychology, I would reckon. He said, a man's self is the sum total of all he can call his, not only his body and his psychic powers. I do grant you it's rather misogynist, but he was saying that who you are is everything that you can claim ownership over. And so this is how we have our sense of identity. It's not just our bodies and our minds, it's our property. And this notion has been developed into the concept of the extended self. Who we are is who we are in relation to others and in relation to what we can call our stuff versus your stuff. So property becomes an extension of your identity. What's mine, what's yours, and what's communal. And that seems fairly straightforward, but I just point out in the book, and I make several examples, that defining property is actually not that easy. What is property? Because it depends on where in the world you ask that question. And I give a number of examples, but I just wanted to share with you one of the more bizarre examples to try and show you or highlight the problem of establishing property. This is Shannon Wishart. Now, in 2007, Shannon, he's from North Carolina. He used to be a trader. He'd buy up goods and sell them on for profit. And he went to a sale of the contents of these storage units were being sold off because the users hadn't kept up with their repayments. And he bought himself this smoker grill for a couple of dollars. He loaded it onto the back of his truck and he took it home. Imagine his surprise when he got home and he opened it up and he discovered inside a left human foot. Now, this whole bizarre story is captured in a fantastic documentary called Finders Keepers. Okay, and in it, they've actually got the phone call to the 911 phone call to the police. And I dare try and, well, why not? I'll try the accent. He's from the Appalachian Mountains, and he's got the phone call, and he calls the police and says, I got myself a left human foot. It's plumb ugly. It's got me grossed out. So the police didn't know where did this foot come from a corpse? Was it an unreported murder? So they came and collected the foot. Meanwhile, news had got out about this foot, and Shannon, being a bit of an entrepreneur, thought, well, maybe I can make some money by charging it, adults a couple of bucks to see the foot, like a freak show thing. So he called the police back. He says, I want my foot back. I got a bill of sale here that says I own everything, including the grill and everything contained therein. Meanwhile, the police continue with their investigation, and the story becomes even more bizarre, believe it or not. It turns out the foot is not from a corpse. It's from someone who's well and truly alive, namely John Wood, who lives in South Carolina. You see, John had been in a fatal air crash several years earlier. His father was a very wealthy businessman. They had their own light aircraft. John had been piloting. They crashed. His father was unfortunately killed. John was very seriously injured and had to have his left foot amputated. And bizarrely, he asked for his foot. back from the hospital, and more bizarrely, they gave him his foot. So he took it home, and he put it in embalming fluid, and he dried it out. Meanwhile, his life spirals out of control. He's a drug addict, so he's losing all his income. All his worldly possessions are put into storage, and he moves to South Carolina. Of course, he doesn't keep up with the repayments, and that's how the foot ended up in the possession of Shannon. Now, in the documentary, some great scenes. This is a scene where John returns to collect his foot, and he's confronted by Shannon in the car park saying, "This is my foot," and they're fighting over whose foot it is, and Shannon's trying to get joint custody of the foot so he can take it out on tour. You can see it's really bizarre. It ends up in court, and the judge says, actually, the foot should be returned to John Wood, but Shannon, yeah, he's got a legal right of claim on this. So he has to be compensated to the tune of $5,000. Now, you think this is bizarre, but actually, you think you own your own body, but you don't actually own your body. You don't. You can't do with your body as you wish, as we well know. For example, you can't sell a kidney in the UK or the US, but you can sell your kidney in Singapore or Australia. So this gets at the heart of what the issue of property is. It's not really, it has to be defined. It has to be established, and that's why we have lawyers. As Jeremy Bentham pointed out, there's nothing in nature to tell you who owns something or what is property. It has to be established. It's a mere conception of the mind. Now, I'm a developmental psychologist, so I study conceptual development in children. And for me, I'm fascinated. How do children understand the concepts of ownership? How do they navigate the world? Because once you start to think about ownership, you realize it controls your whole movement, what you can do, where you can go, what you can use. Ownership really controls our lives. So how do children learn this? Well, I think there are some universals, but I think a lot of it is partly to do with cultural learning. The definition of properties are really things that we pick up from those around us. And I just want to end with a couple of examples to show you how culture can shape this. Let me tell you about the endowment effect. Now, the endowment effect is probably one of the most studied phenomena in behavioral economics. And it refers to the fact that once you own something, you think it's worth a lot more than other people are willing to pay for it. So, for example, if you have two identical coffee cups, you'd say, well, they're worth the same value. But as soon as you own one, or it's given to you, or you're endowed with it, you think it's worth more. And what's interesting about the endowment effect is it's much stronger in Western industrialized countries like ours in comparison to more collectivist countries in the Far East. And part of this reflects this relationship of status and individualism and our stuff signaling our status in comparison to societies where there's much more collectivist notions of ownership. Now, normally, the endowment effect doesn't appear in children until around about 7 years of age. Quite an important milestone in development, because that's also the age where children start to have a really good sense of their identity. But we've done experiments showing that you can get the endowment effect in toddlers, 3-year-olds, if you get them to think about themselves. By getting them to engage in exercises, talking about themselves or drawing pictures, suddenly they start to show the endowment effect. And I think it also explains why you don't get the endowment effect in hunter-gatherers. So this is the Hassa tribe, one of the last tribes of Tanzania. And what's interesting is that their notion of self is very different. Their notion of property is very different. It's much more communal. In fact, they've got a concept called demand sharing, that if you're not using it, then I can have it. It's like going over to your neighbors and taking their lawnmower when they're not there, saying, well, you're not using it, so I'll just help myself to it. So you can imagine how society would fall apart if we had that demand sharing. So our possessions and our sense of self is intertwined. Who we are is defined by what we can claim ownership over. And I think Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi says it beautifully. A person who owns a nice home, a new car, good furniture, the latest appliances is recognized as others as having passed the test of personhood in our society. The objects that we possess and consume are wanted because they tell us things about ourselves that we need to hear in order to stop ourselves from falling apart. We have this distorted sense of identity based on our possessions. And as I point out in the book, and returning to that beginning when I said about perspective, we come into a world with nothing and leave with nothing. But in between, in our brief moment on this life stage, we strut and fret over possessions as if our existence is defined by what we can own. But I hope all of us would leave here today and not end up with the regrets of this individual on our deathbeds. I should have bought more crap.